You're listening to the weekly Parsha podcast with Ari Goldwag, recorded with Hashem's never-ending assistance in Ramat Shemesh Israel, 5778, 2017. This week's Parsha is Parshas Noach, and we have in our Parsha the kind of the crossover years from Adam HaRishon, which we spoke about in Bereshis, and now we have Noach, and we have the years in the interim till the Dor HaFlaga, till the time of the dispersion, when the people of the world were dispersed over many lands. And then we have the Advent. At the end of our Parsha, we have Avram Aveeno coming onto the scene. The Torah turns at that point, starting with the beginning of Lech Lecha, to teaching us about Avram Aveeno, his mission, his bringing God into the world, etc. But we have the foundation in our Parsha, Parshas Noach. We have the foundation of what went on leading up to Avram Aveeno, leading up to the need for a person like Avram Aveeno to come along and to start teaching about a one God. Because in order for that to be necessary, when Adam HaRishon was around, the first man was around, he was the Yitzir Kapoi, he was the creation of God himself. God created that man, and Adam HaRishon experienced God directly. So to have any kind of fear, any kind of non-belief in God didn't exist at the time of Adam HaRishon himself. But as the generations went by, 10 generations until Noach, and then another 10 generations till Avraham, we had a degradation, a degeneration that occurred. So this parsha is foundational, setting the scene for Avram Aveeno, for Abraham to come onto the scene. And I want to understand what happened in this interim period, because the Torah gives us a description, and so we need to understand at its depth what was going on, what was the concept here. And in order to do so, I want to focus not so much on the flood and on Noach, not so much on what occurred in his time, but more so on the Haflaga, on what happened in the time of Avraham himself, which, as the Meforshim point out, Noach was still alive at that time. In fact, Noach died when Avram Avena was 58 years old. If you figure out the calculation, the flood happened when he was 600 years old, and he lived to be 950. If you make the cheshbonos, as the Meforshim do, as the commentaries do, you'll see that Avram Aveeno was 58 years old when Noach died. So I want to focus on that point in time, the point in time of the Haflaga, of the dispersion. I want to look at the psukim, the verses that speak about the dispersion. I also want to share with you a beautiful Ramban and Rabbeinu Bachai, which talk about the contrast between the Mabul, what was the mistake, and why was it that in the generation of Noach, the people had to be completely destroyed, as opposed to in the time of the dispersion, the Haflaga. So the mistake that they made there, the sin that went on there, was such that it was only necessary that there be a dispersion, but not that they be completely destroyed. Okay, so those are the foundational things that we want to address here today. We want to understand the setting of the scene for Avram to come onto the scene, and the devolving of the world into idolatry, and what that means in this context. What does it mean that they were worshiping idols? What is that? It's hard for us to relate to that in our times, even though there is idolatry in our time, and according to Jewish law, Christianity is considered idolatry because they worship a human being. God has no form, according to our teachings. God is formless, and he doesn't take form. He manifests through us, but he doesn't take form, so that's considered idolatry. But at that time, the idolatry was a different form. It was literal idols, and they worshiped the sun and the stars and the moon, etc. So we need to understand what that looked like at that time. Who was Avram Aveeno? What did he come to rectify? What was his mission, which is really a mission that continues to this day in the form of the Jewish people throughout the last 3,700 years since Avram Aveeno came onto the scene. So let's see together. I'd like to share with you the verses in regards to the Haflaga, which begins in chapter 11, verse 1. The Torah is very opaque when it comes to the description of what went on. What was the sin exactly of the Dor HaFlaga, of the generation of the dispersion? It's not so clear. But let's read the verses, and we'll see the explanation of the Ramban and the Rabbeinu Bachai, and we'll see what was going on. So the verse tells us that the entire land spoke one language, which, as the commentaries say, was Lashon HaKodesh, the Hebrew language, which is called the holy language, the holy tongue. And Udvar Machodim, they all had they spoke about one thing. They were united. which is unique about the generation of the dispersion, interestingly. Although they ended up becoming dispersed, before that they were united. Verse 2, Vayehi benosam mikadam vayimtzu bika be'eretz shinar vayeshvu sham. So it's not clear exactly who it's speaking about and who the dispersion affected. It seems, if you look around at the commentaries, that it was only something that affected a certain part of the population, the offspring of Shem, perhaps. See over there. But whoever it was that we're speaking about, they traveled from a certain location. They found a place in a valley, which was Shinar, which is also reference to Bavel, which is Babylonia, which is present-day Iraq. Verse 3, Vayomru ish el re'ehu, and each person said to the other, Hava nilban el avenim, let us create bricks, v'nisra l'sreifa, and fire up the fire. V'atihilahem halavenu le'even, v'chemer hoya lehem lechomer. So they started to build this tower. They were making the bricks. They were involved in building a tower. What's this tower? We'll soon see. Vayomru, the next verse, and they said, Hava nivne lanu ir umigdal v'resha b'shamayim. Let us build ourselves a city and a tower, which is going to stretch up to the heavens. V'nasa lanu shem, and we will make for ourselves a name. V'nasa lanu shem. These are those three words are the words that the Ramban and the Rabbeinu Bachai speak about at length. We will make ourselves a name. What does that mean? We'll find out. Pen nafutz al pnei kol haaretz, lest we be spread out upon the entire earth. So they wanted to remain united. They had a single purpose. What was that purpose? We'll soon see. God came down to see this city and this tower that the people built. And it's important, as the Meforshim point out, that the name here that's used is not the name Elokim, which was used in the Mabul. When it came to the deluge, when it came to the flood, so the Torah uses the name Elokim, the name of judgment of God. But in this context, it uses the name Hashem, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which denotes God's mercy. Vayomer Hashem, God said, Hein am echad, they are one nation, v'safa achas lechulam, they all speak one language, v'zeh hachilam la'asais, and this is what they have begun to do. V'atalo yibatzer mehem kol asher yozmu la'asais. I'm not going to allow them to complete that which they have intended to do. Verse 7, Hava nerdav v'navlo sham sifasam. Let us go down. God is speaking in the royal plurals. Let us go down and we will ruin their speech. Asher lo yishmu ish tzvas re'ehu, so that they won't understand each other. Verse 8, Vayafetz Hashem yisam yisham al pnei kol haaretz v'yachdu l'bnei sa'ir. And then, so God changed the languages. They previously spoke one language, and they were united in one place. From that point on, there became 70 languages for the 70 different nations, and the 70 nations were spread out throughout the world, throughout the different locations. And the verse finishes off by telling us, Al ken kara shema Bavel, and that's why it was called Bavel, Babylonia. What's the word Bavel mean? Kisham balal Hashem sfas kol haaretz, because that was the place where God mixed up. The word Bavel is from Lashon Balal, which means to mix up. That is where God mixed up all of the languages, and the effect was Misham hafetzam Hashem al pnei kol haaretz, and from there Hashem spread them along the entire length of the earth. And it's interesting, as the commentaries also point out, that it was God's will. In the Parsha shot of it, they were coming together, they wanted to be united in one location, but God wasn't interested in human beings only being united in one location. Rather, Hashem wanted that the world should be inhabited, the entire world should be inhabited by all of the people, and that the people should go everywhere. And so this was a foundational incident. We need to understand what was going on, but it was a foundational incident that created the reality that we see today, which is that human beings are inhabiting the entire earth, entire world, and they speak many different languages, which is also interesting. I don't know if we'll be able to address the significance or the depth of that originally they spoke all one language, and now they're going to speak 70 different languages. Also, an interesting point, which we won't really get to address, but it's worth thinking about, is the fact that Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, Abraham, we continue to speak the language of Lashon HaKodesh. We continue to speak the Holy Tongue, the land of Israel. We speak Ivrit. Avram Ivri, he was called. He was the Hebrew. And we speak Hebrew in Israel. And we continue to speak that language. So that specific, all-inclusive language which was really the mother of all languages, Hebrew. So that remained only by the Jewish people. And the Jewish people, as we'll see, also represent the all-inclusive aspect, as we mentioned numerous times in the past, the all-inclusive aspect, so it makes sense that we would speak the all-inclusive language, which is the language of Hebrew. But it's interesting that originally, everyone spoke that language. That was the universal language, was Hebrew. Very interesting. Okay, so that's the end of this little section of the Torah. Then it goes on to speak about the Toldos, the generations, and brings us all the way down to Avram Aveeno, to Abraham, and it starts to tell us about the story of Avram Aveeno and how he left his original place, and there's a remez, there's a hint to Orkazdim, the fact that he was thrown into the fire, and this is the foundation onto the scene is set for Avram Aveeno to come and to begin his calling in the name of God. Now, what went on here? What was the story here? What was this business? What were they trying to do? What was this tower that they were trying to build? So the Ramban, I'm actually going to read straight into the Rabbeinu Bachai, because the Ramban says things in a very closed manner. It doesn't reveal a lot, and the Rabbeinu Bachai tells us more, and I'd like to share with you the beautiful words of the Rabbeinu Bachai. So he gives a few different pshatim based on the Parsha pshat, and then based on, as is his way. And then he goes finally to Al Derech HaKabbalah, and that's the way I'd like to understand. Based on the deeper understanding of the Torah, it's also based on the Zohar. The verse is V'nasa lanu shem. We said that the people said, let us make a name for ourselves. Let us build a city. Let us build a tower in order to make a name for ourselves. The Rabbeinu Bachai lays down a foundation here, that the sin of the people of the Dor HaFlaga, of the dispersion, was the same sin as their great-great-great-great-grandfather 20 generations before, Adam Harishon, the first man. And what was that sin? It's called katatz minatias. Very interesting language. Literally it means that they cut off the plantlings. They pulled out they cut off the branches. What is the idea of cutting off the branches? The idea of cutting off the branches is you have a tree, and the tree is called the tree of life, and it's a spiritual tree. All of our souls are attached to it. Each and every one of us is attached to the central column. We are all the branches of that column, and it attaches back to the root. And who is the root? Of course, God himself is the root of all of our souls. So now, katzas benetias means that they detached themselves from the root. They detached the branches from the tree. They looked at reality. They looked at the branches, what was visible reality, and they said, this is not connected to God. They saw that God manifests through the stars and through the sun, and he manifests in many different ways, through nature, etc. And they said, all we have is what we see. And they disconnected from the root. They disconnected from the tree itself. Katzas benetias, and this was the same sin as Adam Harishon. Adam Harishon also detached, in a certain sense, he detached himself, but he detached from, he brought reality into a lower place where you can't see God. Okay? And this is why it refers to them as Binet Adam. Right? In the verse, it refers to them as Binet Adam, the sons of man. This is in verse 5. Asher banu Bnei Ha'adam, that was built by the sons of man. It refers to them as sons of man because they repeated the sins of the first man, of Adam Harishon. Okay? Kain ha'nashim ha'ela, katzitzu benetias ifridu ha'pri min ha'ilan. Just like Adam, the first man, had separated the fruit from the tree. Right? He had taken the fruit which God told him not to eat. He had separated from the tree. Zeu she'amar v'nasa lanu shem. They also did the same thing. They detached the fruit from the tree. They said, all there is the fruit. All we see is what you see is what you get. And there's no root. We find, in regards to the generation of Enoch, that it refers to the word shem, use the word name, right? Which refers to the fact that they were serving idolatry, right? If you think about what is a name is the outer aspect. It's the way that you interact with me. It describes perhaps a certain aspect of my essence, but it describes only how you perceive me. It's not the true essence of who I am. My child calls me Abba, Dad, right? But that's one aspect of who I am. So to only look at the outer aspect, it speaks about the fact that in the generation of Enoch, they stopped calling out in the name of God. Okay? It uses the same language of a lashon of huchal, which means to become profane. This was chil Hashem. It was a desecration, or a taking away of the holiness. Taking away. It's like the word chil literally means hollow, because you take away the inside and all you look at is the outside. You take away the soul and you only look at the body, right? So that's what it means to be profane, to be profaned. Okay, so he continues and he says like this. I'm skipping a few words here. That the idea is, Ki hayu osim haschala min hasoif. They said that the end is the beginning. V'zeu akitzutz. This is the idea of a disconnect, a cutting off. Alkein hiskir lashon v'zeh chilam lasois. That's why he uses the language of this language. Kolamer osim haschala min hasoif. The word hachilam can also mean to begin. And so the idea is that they're creating a beginning out of the end. Hanikra zeh, v'zeh shem, etc. Hi amida achorayno. So this is the last of the spheres, which is Malchus. Interestingly, they believed in the last of the spheres. They believed that there was some kind of spiritual realm and an interaction between us and the spiritual realm. As we're going to see, it's going to contrast with what happened in the Dor HaMabul. But they disconnected the outer spirituality from the inner spirituality. This is what it means that it was when they traveled from Kedem. What does it mean they traveled from Kedem? The word Kedem means from the east, but it can also mean from before. It's from the one who's the source, the one who's before it all. They removed themselves from God. So, okay, again, I'm going to skip here, but it's a similar sin to Adam Harishon, who also disconnected himself from God. He moved away from godliness. They did as well. Okay. So it's very interesting. So here is where he gets to explain the point which we brought up earlier, which is, why does it use the name Yud Kei Vav Kei in this context? Why does it use the name of Rachamim? When it comes to our chapter, when it speaks about the concept of the haflaga, of the dispersion, it doesn't use the name Elokim, the name of judgment, which it used in regards to the Mabul, the flood. Kidar Mabul kafru b'mida acharayna. The generation of the flood denied even the last of the spheres, even the aspect of Malchus. They didn't believe in any aspect of spirituality. They completely disconnected. And the last of the midas, the last of the spheres, which is Malchus, corresponds to the land. So the land itself had to also be destroyed. They had to be completely destroyed. So they were erased from this world and the next. They were completely destroyed because they completely themselves had destroyed themselves. So they therefore had a measure for measure. God responded to them measure for measure. They were destroyed. They were completely disconnected, so they were completely destroyed. But the generation of the dispersion, so they just denied the inner aspect of spirituality. So that was the name, the inner aspect, the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, the name of mercy, which is the inner aspect of God's manifestation in this world, was what they were denying in the generation of the dispersion. So that was the name that Hashem used when it came to bringing about justice upon them. Each person, each group was punished based on their sin. Okay, trying to see here. So So it's very interesting because what you see by, and I believe I saw this in the Meforshim here, that what you see by the generation of the flood, or it could be this is my own idea, I'm not sure, that by the generation of the flood, so the aver, the sin that they had was chamas. It was, they stole from each other, they were completely mushchasim in their relationships between each other, not just in their relationship with God, but also in their relationships with each other. The dispersion, that generation, so they were united. They had a full relationship with each other, but they did not have a relationship in the proper sense with God. So they did have some spirituality, some kind of perhaps overriding, okay, they're connected to the universe or something, but they didn't have a true relationship with God. They weren't interested in God's will. They were interested in defying God's will. They were interested in building a tower to escape God's will. The Meforshim speak about the fact that they knew that the Torah modeled a flood. So they had been destroyed with water. So they said maybe God next is going to try to destroy us with fire. So they built this tower in order to escape the fire. See the Meforshim speak about that. And so the idea here is that there was a different type of kfira, a different type of denial that was going on. It wasn't a denial of spirituality, it was a denial of godliness, of a higher spirituality, of a deeper spirituality. And in the Dor HaMabul, in the times of the flood, it was a complete denial of anything. We're not connected to each other. We're not connected to God. Okay? And now, what's interesting is, I was thinking about this question related to the thing I just said, the point I just made, which is that the flood happened after 10 generations. 10 generations from Adam to Noach. 10 generations from Noach until to Avram Aveeno, to Abraham, and in his time was the Haflaga, was the dispersion. So they were afraid, it's very interesting, they were afraid that something was going to happen. They knew something was about to happen, some kind of justice from God was about to happen, and indeed, that is what happened. They thought it would be through fire, and it ended up being through a dispersion. But it's very interesting that there was a culmination that occurred after 10 generations. First in the time of Noach, and then in the time of Avram Aveeno, in the time of Abraham. But there was like a degeneration, a devolving that occurred over 10 generations. And every 10 generations, it seemed, it would be repeated. And what's also interesting, as we mentioned earlier, is that Avram Aveeno lived in the time of Noach. Noach was about to pass on from the world. The last 58 years of Noach's life, Avram Aveeno had already been born. And so it's very interesting that it's like V'zarach HaShemesh Uba HaShemesh, like the sun rises, the sun sets. Our Chazal speak about the fact in the context of tzaddikim, of great righteous people. When a righteous person passes on from the world, it doesn't happen until a new righteous person was already born that would come to lead the Jewish people. And in a similar way, you see there's a completion of the previous 10 generations with Noach. There's a punishment that comes on the world, a destruction that comes on the world because of their separation from God. A new beginning, a devolving for 10 generations. And again, with Avram Aveeno, there's a new beginning. Now, what's interesting is that Avraham now, he becomes he becomes the soul. The Jewish people who are his progenitors, we are from him. So we are the soul of the world. We are the soul of the 70 nations. And Avram Aveeno was the soul of the nations at that time, the 70 nations that began at that time, the 70 languages. And he retained Ivrit, he retained Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh, the holy language, the holy tongue. So what is this all? What is it coming to teach us? What is the idea here? So to me, what my take home is that you see that every certain amount of time, and I think in our times, whereas in that time, so 950 years, that was the amount of time that person lived. It lived to be almost 1,000, right? Noach lived to be 950. So that was the 10 generations. That was that amount of time, which was a completion of the circle. In our times, we know King David writes, a person lives 70, 80 years. That's the average lifespan. So the 70 years is the completion of a circle. We've spoken about this also in the past. And so every 70 years, there's a new completion. It's especially significant that we're reaching a time now, 70 years since World War II, 70 years since the beginning of the Jewish people having control over the land of Israel, 70 years. So we have this completion, we have a certain upheaval that's going on in the world today. And that was what was going on in the world at that time. So when we read these psukim, we read these verses, it's teaching us something profound that we can have a take-home from. And I think that the take-home is that at the completion of each tkufa, of each time period, time span, there's like a rumbling, an earthquake that goes on, and there's a change that's about to happen, and people sense that change. Something is about to change and turn over. And a new person comes on the scene, and it's an Avram Aveeno, an Abraham. And his job is to now bring the people back to God. And he begins that mission. The Torah is setting that stage for us to see that. And it happens also in the times of Noach. He also did that in his time with the cataclysmic event that occurred in his time. And so we also need to be sensitive and realize that we are living in such a time as well, I believe. And so what's the message, what's the lesson? The message and the lesson are that we need to see what's going on. We need to see the devolving that's going on in the Western world, throughout the world, and the earthquakes, the things that are going on a spiritual level, on a very high level. And we need to be mechazik ourselves as we read the psukim, we have set the stage. We have set the stage with this cataclysmic event. There's a new world, and now Avram Aveeno, whereas before, it was like Abraham was on one side. He's called Avram Aveeno also because he was on one. The word Avram means on one side. He was on one side, everyone else was on the other side. But his job is to bring everyone over onto his side of godliness. Everyone else was idolatry, separated from God, as we spoke about. Avram's job is to reconnect us to the essence, to the soul, to the Yud Ke Vav Ke, which is inside, to the depth, to the godliness. That's what we're here to do. And so we have a mission. Each and every one of us has a mission to reconnect to God, has to look at what's going on in the world on a social level, on a physical level, at every level. And we need to recognize that we are members of the Jewish people and that we continue the legacy of Avram Aveeno, of Abraham, and that is to reconnect to the spirituality, to the Yud Ke Vav Ke, which is the essence of all of reality. And despite all of the forces that are against that, it's our job to learn from Avram Aveeno, and to, as we read these psukim, see, he talks about what he does. He does chesed, he does kindness. That's his main midah. And we see how Yitzchak Avinu did it with his midah of gvura, and Yaakov Avinu with his midah of tiferes and emes. And so these are foundational psukim, foundational parshias, with which we ourselves can infuse our lives with new meaning. So I want to bless you, and please bless me. Hashem should help us, that we should take the lessons. We should see how the stage was set then and how the stage is set today for us to be able to come into the world and to search out what is our purpose, what is our mission, and how can we infuse godliness into our lives and into the lives of all those around us. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbos. This podcast was made possible through the gracious donations of listeners like you. For more podcasts like this, please visit www.arigoldwag.com or search on iTunes Ari Goldwag.